Good morning. I'd like to thank Christina and Christina for organizing this gathering, very interesting gathering of colleagues. The title of my talk is Taking a Long View of the British Invasion of Manila, Replication and Commodification of Objects of Knowledge. I cite the replication of objects of knowledge to emphasize that the artworks discussed here are also carriers of knowledge. The replication and commodification of these works attest to their multifaceted role as objects of beauty that encode important information. Objects whose lives change as they transition from artworks to commodities, to trophies of trade, trophies of travel, and trophies of war. Pivoting on the British occupation of Manila from 1762 to 1764 as reference point and anchor, this paper examines inter-imperial dynamics leading to the British invasion and its subsequent impact on the lives of objects implicated in the rivalry between Spain, Britain, and the newly ascendant American Republic. 18th century Manila on the map here was especially attractive to competing empire builders for its strategic location as the fulcrum of the Spanish-controlled Trans-Pacific trade. British interest in Manila commenced long before Spain formally opened the port to foreign trade in 1834. The 17th century English country trade surreptitiously traded through merchant ships flying Portuguese and or Armenian colors, for Spain did not allow British ships to trade directly with Manila. Nonetheless, the English East India Company sought to create a market for English textiles in Manila through the intra-Asian trade. Manila and Cavite were both prized British targets. The scholar Ivan Valdez-Bubnov notes the historical importance of shipbuilding, the shipbuilding industry in Cavite. Impressive galleons were outfitted as warships to repel attacks by rival powers who coveted the wealth of trade goods and silver that these galleons carried. Other talks in this conference yesterday discussed in detail the historical events and personalities involved in the British invasion and occupation. This paper attempts to shift focus from a narrative of plunder and loss to examine instead the reorientations of patronage and movements of luxury goods whose distribution was diverted from the usual destinations in Latin America to English and American collections as a result of the British and subsequent American intervention. The successful colonization of the Philippines by the Spanish whetted the appetite of rival European powers, including the British, who were already entrenched in India. As the 7 Years' War between Britain and France spread to Manila, and after Spain joined the war on the side of France, the die was cast. Admiral Samuel Cornish and General William Draper, on the right, attacked Manila in 1762, forcing the acting Spanish Governor General, Archbishop Manuel Antonio Rojo, to surrender the city. This exquisite ivory Niño Dormido on the left is said to have been among Draper's booty. When it came up for auction in London in 1981, Jaime Sobel de Ayala, who was then the Philippine ambassador to the court of St. James, alerted Jaime Laya, then governor of the Central Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas, who successfully acquired and repatriated this important work. The rescued Niño features an ivory sleeping Christ child dressed in rich garments resting on a four-poster bed elaborately crafted in silver filigree and encrusted with gems. This was exhibited, by the way, at Ayala Museum for the first time in 2004 in an exhibition co-curated by Ricky Jose and the late Ramon Villegas. So it's on exhibit again, ongoing in an exhibition that I curated, Intertwined Trans-Pacific Transcultural Philippines, that's ongoing at Ayala Museum until December 31, 2022. So the bed's distinctively Chinese style suggests Sino-Filipino workmanship. Unfortunately, the original owner and setting for this Niño Dormido is unknown, though it has been suggested that these Niño Dormido ensembles may have been created for home altars. Though the British had a modest knowledge of Manila when they sailed from Madras in 1762, they had a copy of a very important and accurate map. This is according to research by J.M. Mancini, that they actually had a copy of the famous Murillo Velarde map. And it is said that the copy was seized by Commodore George Anson when he captured the galleon Nuestra Senora de Covadonga in 1743. So it was not a random act when Draper seized the 8 copper plates used to print the original edition maps. And ironically, this act of plunder ensured the map's survival because Draper donated the 8 copper plates to Cambridge University, his alma mater, which issued restrikes of the map. It's likely that the few surviving replicas trace back to these English reprints. One of these copies was purchased by the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., which we see on the screen, and it is said that about 15 copies of the map survive. On the left is the Library of Congress, a copy of the Library of Congress, and on the right is another copy in the Newberry Library in Chicago. And you'll notice that the vignettes on the sides, on left and right, are not in the same sequence in these maps. The map was commissioned by King Philip V of Spain in 1733 and designed by the Jesuit priest Pedro Murillo Velarde, drawn by Filipino artist Francisco Suarez, and engraved by another Filipino, Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay. So why is this map important? It scientifically charts the entire Philippine archipelago for the first time, including important maritime routes. It was also the largest and most precise map at the time. And here you'll see the scale of a copy that in a private collection as we were installing it for the intertwined exhibition at Ayala Museum. Another restrike from Cambridge on the left was acquired by the Duke of Northumberland and put up for auction about 200 years later in 2017 on the left. And this was a copy that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, that was used to contest China's claim over the West Philippine Sea. On the right is another copy sold by an auctioneer in Colchester in 2019. The maps are decorated with 12 vignettes on left and right margins, as you see here on both copies. Some vignettes contain detailed maps, such as this plan of Manila with architectural structures that were so accurate, it must have made it easy for the British to carry out their attack. Other vignettes depict local inhabitants, such as mestizos on the left, extreme left, and Indios lower left. Lower right on the left, the Indios and the Visayas on the right side. And in the background there, you see a couple of Indios dancing the kumintang to a local musician playing a stringed instrument. I suggest that these images may be considered precursors of the popular 19th century painting genre known as tipos del pais, for country types that portray local inhabitants, ethnicities, attire, and occupation, discussed in greater detail below. Other vignettes depict foreign traders who frequented the island, such as the Armenians, top left, the extreme left, and Chinese or Sangli traders bottom right. Both Manila. Both images, besides images of local inhabitants and foreign traders, the vignettes depict agricultural activities such as on the left and local flora and fauna on the right, such as flora, sugarcane, papaya, jackfruit, and palm nuts. These maps were sold to libraries and collectors. Thus, commodification of knowledge encouraged the replication of artworks for that encoded specific information. From vignettes depicting local inhabitants, I now turn to early 19th century genre called tipos del pais. Though post-dating the British occupation by at least 50 years, important examples of tipos del pais by Filipino artists Damian Domingo and Justiniano Asuncion trace English provenance through patronage or ownership. An important folio-sized album in the Newberry Library in Chicago contains watercolor images of local inhabitants and their attire. Each plate, including the title page on the left, is signed in black ink on lower right corner, Damianus Dominicus Pinxit. The album returned to Manila for the first time in 2004 in the exhibition Multiple Originals, Original Multiples, 19th Century Images of Philippine Costumes that I curated at Ayala Museum, and you'll see the installation shot on the right. The plates are folio-sized European laid paper with the watermark Harris 1817, suggesting English manufacture of the paper. The title page identifies the artist Damian Domingo and the patron's name, Rafael Daniel Babon. Though I've published a number of essays on this particular album, my focus was on surfacing the previously undocumented phenomenon of Chinese replications of the album. Today, I'd like to focus on the question of its English connections. Most scholars, including myself, tend to presume a Spanish connection with Philippine tipos del pais, but a notable number of surviving tipos del pais and related albums that I've identified as Chinese copies have English X collections provenance. According to pioneering research by Chito Santiago, Rafael Babon, who commissioned this album, and it's spelled Baboom in later Chinese copies, was an Armenian cloth merchant. One might speculate that this patron may have connections with the British who sought to create an Asian market for Spanish textiles. In addition to the Harris 1817, in addition to the Harris 1817 watermark, the curious erasure of the original Spanish captions at bottom center. Can you see that here, which is more visible in person than on the photographs? And the bilingual reinscription of the captions in English and Spanish, left and right, suggests links with both Spanish and English speakers or clients. You see in these two examples, the Spanish captions on the left with the English translations on the right. Chinese replication of Philippine originals raises intriguing questions. Who were the intended consumers of these copies? What languages were used in these trade networks? Why do the Chinese copies include Spanish captions only, in contrast to the bilingual captioning of the original album at the Newberry? The Mestiza watercolor on English laid paper by Damian Domingo on the, why does this keep going by itself? On the left, lost. Yeah, Mestiza watercolor on English laid paper by Damian Domingo on the left, when compared to the, what?
Yeah, I think you're on slide. Let's escape. Which slide do you want to hear?
The ghost of Damian Domingo.
Kasi i-slideshow siya. Ito na lang.
Stop. Okay, the Chinese replication of originals raises these intriguing questions. Now, so the mestizo. Just talk louder, faster. Mestizo watercolor in English laid paper on the left by Damian Domingo. When compared to the Chinese copy on pith on the right, reveals differences in anatomical proportions.
Dapat from
Maybe override the timing.
just from no, I just.
So anyway, so while we're waiting, so the Damian Domingo will be on the left, and then you compare it to the Chinese copy on the right, and you see differences in anatomical proportions, in the rendering of the facial features, and most importantly, the difference in the paper. You'll notice the paper on the left is going to be an English imported laid paper with a with a grid, whereas on the right, it'll be pith paper. And I'm showing you here the pith from a Chinese export painting that shows the cellular structure of the paper when subjected to 100 times magnification, which we did at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. So just to go back here, you'll see this is laid paper with a watermark that obviously you can't see in the photograph, but it's English 1817 watermark. And this is this paper, this Ayala Museum. And you can see the distinct differences in the types of paper, the types of watercolor. It's gouache on the right. This is watercolor, thinner watercolor on the left. The sizes are also different. The Damian Domingo is larger. The pith examples are smaller. And when we had the Chinese images, export watercolors examined at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco Conservation Center, and you can see distinctly the different cellular structure of the pith, which is actually not pith paper at all, but it's cut spirally from the pith of the Tetrapanax papyriferum, called Kunshu, is native only in Taiwan and in southern China. So okay, so also, so the Chinese copy that you see displays a more rigid, almost mechanical rendering when you compare it to the original Damian Domingo on the left. And most noteworthy is the use of pith instead of the more expensive imported European paper. And just make sure I didn't miss anything. So I've discussed the fragile material, which is technically not paper, but it was manufactured by cutting the pith of the Tetrapanax papyriferum spirally and opening it up. And it was used in the 19th century export paintings with a distinctive cellular structure visible under the 100 times magnification. Now, commissioning the Damian Domingo album on imported paper is consistent with the Chinese practice of creating master albums on imported European paper to be copied later by apprentices on the less expensive pith. So it's not difficult to imagine the original patron bringing the Domingo album to Canton for multiple replication. Domingo's mestizo shopkeeper on the left, for example, is reiterated in smaller scale in the Chinese copy on pith on the right. The two works are clearly by different details, such as the different designs on the shawl, the pointy black slippers on the bottom. You see they've been transformed into Chinese slippers on the left. on the right, and unlike the folio-sized sheets of the Newbery album, the replicas are small sheets of pith mounted with colored strips on larger pages. The Ayala album used to be mounted with pink, if you'll remember, Ricky, pink strips. And it's very interesting because when we go to the V&A album, they have these lime green ribbons. But I'm jumping ahead here. So another set of tipos del país with more explicit English connections is the unsigned album of Philippine costumes in the New York Public Library. I'm showing you here on the screen. The album includes 9 exceptional watercolor paintings by Justiniano Asuncion on the left and 4 other figures by an unknown anonymous artist on the right. The album's title page notes that, and I quote, "These figures were painted for the sake of the costumes by a native artist of Manila for M. Sodden, Esquire of Bath, in the year 1841 or 42, 9 in number, and the other 4 by an inferior artist. And tomorrow I'm going to Bath to track down Sodden." Anyway, what's interesting is a colleague of ours known to mutual friend, Sandy Castro, has done research on this M. Sodden of Bath because we're both fascinated by who this person was. And she's actually found a Sodden family of ribbon makers in Bath. So I'm looking forward to that. So the importance of commercial information is reflected in the accompanying notes to this album. For example, referencing the mestizo on the left, I quote, "An exact representation of a rich mestizo. He is a great dandy and fond of imitating the Europeans, as you may see by the hat and umbrella. The shirt is made of a species of grass cloth, beautifully embroidered, the cost depending upon the quantity of work upon it. This man would not think of wearing a shirt of less value than from $10 to $12. So you can see there's this commercial aspect to the compiling the album. Though painted later than Damian Domingo's album, many of the figures in the New York album are based on Domingo's earlier works. For example, the anonymous Indio Natural on the right, dated 1841 to 42, derives from Domingo's superior rendering of Indio de Manila circa 1820s on the left. Justiniano Asuncion Mestiza on the right is similarly informed by Domingo's Mestiza de Manila on the left. Moreover, the description accompanying Asuncion's image on the right applies as well to Domingo's earlier image. And I have a very shortened quote: "A guardia de vino, an officer to look after the government monopolies such as arak and tobacco. His hat is made of cane and horsehair is the most remarkable. These hats sometimes cost $40 or $50. I was wondering, the hat's more expensive than the embroidered piña shirt. So anyway, one of the most exciting discoveries of my career is this Chinese album of watercolors containing copies of Asuncion's works created by the well-known Cantonese artist Ting Qua, or Guan Lianchang, in the Peabody Museum in Salem. It is dated 1854 and with a stamp of the artist. And these are the front and back covers in red silk. Oh no. Ting Qua was among the most prolific artists in Canton during the mid-19th century. This master album contains Chinese figures for apprentices to copy, such as you see on the right. And within this volume, you'll see this image on the left, which is a copy by the master artist Ting Qua of one of the works of Justiniano Asuncion. What is intriguing is that, okay, and this is also replicated again on the right by apprentices in Ting Qua's workshops. So what's intriguing is that the master album by Ting Qua, along with Chinese copies replicating Asuncion's works, are in the collection of an American merchant family, raising the question of convergences between early American and British interests in Manila. British attempts to enhance their commercial engagements with Asia through a base in the Philippines easily spilled over to their North American colony. in the invasion of 1762 informed early American interest in Manila 20 years after the U.S. declared independence from Britain in 1776. The first American merchant ship docked in Manila as the end destination in 1796, initiating the Manila-Salem trade that contributed to creating the first American millionaires. On the left, you have the customs house in Salem receiving ships from Manila. Early American trade with Manila included goods destined for the British market, as you'll see in some of the documentation on the right, where Manila hemp, indigo, and sugar were listed in the 1850 shipping list on the right, for example. Wrapping up, of course, we have to keep in mind that whole thing of the British occupation had to do with the trade. So wrapping up, it's intriguing that Chinese copies of a Philippine album commissioned by an Armenian merchant mostly occur in British collections. In contrast, Chinese copies of an album commissioned by an English client occur in the collections of a US merchant family. So how did the demand for these lexicons of Philippine costumes and textiles entwine American and English merchants decades after the British invasion and occupation of Manila? In 2019, colleagues Sandra Castro and Marilyn Canta alerted me to a fourth album at the V&A Museum, and similarly attributed, or I suspected misattributed, to Damian Domingo. But the global pandemic prevented a personal visit. So examination in person of the fourth set of copies on PIS in the V&A and its collection history, and perhaps comparing it with other Chinese copies could potentially yield additional insights. For example, the two Chinese albums at Ayala Museum and in a private collection use very thin pith paper. Another album of aristocratic English provenance that's now on loan to the National Gallery of Singapore uses thicker pith paper, better quality with more brilliant colors. So did the intended consumers determine the quality of the materials used and the workmanship? This paper has only skimmed the surface of the history of tangible things whose lives and global circulations entwined historical events, rivalries, collaborations among colonial powers, engaged in the India, China, and Manila trade. Simultaneously, works of art and objects of knowledge, these coveted things document geographies and national navigational knowledge, local inhabitants and religions, customs and costumes, produce and products, feeding into the British appetite for knowledge and information as a means of expanding trade and strengthening empire. Thank you.